Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Mormon Stories podcast. I'm John DeLynn. It's March 24th, and we are here in an epic 2-day long series of interviews with host of Mormon Book Reviews podcast and YouTube channel and Christian, progressive, libertarian Christian and evangelical Christian, Steven Pynakker. Hey, Steven.
Hey, John. Boy, I'm having fun here. And yes, libertarian Christian would probably be an apt description.
Perfect. Well, we've talked about what got Steven interested in Mormonism as an evangelical Christian. We've talked about his view on how the Book of Mormon was created in part 2, a secular view. That was part 2. Part 3, we talked about what he loves about Mormonism and the Book of Mormon, with maybe a few criticisms sprinkled in. This is part 4, where we are going to be sort of like retaining Steven Pynakker as a consultant to the Mormon Church on their behalf. We know the Mormon Church, the LDS Church, watches Mormon Stories. We know they react to what we say and do. Hi, Mormon Church Correlation Committee and those who watch. And we're doing you a service now. Steven knows about Christianity. He knows about churches. He knows about Mormonism better than you and better than us. And we're retaining him for a good 45 minutes to an hour to provide you with free recommendations, free consulting. And that's what this episode, part 4, is going to be about. A smart, evangelical, libertarian Christian that knows Mormonism better than all of us. He's going to give you, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, some sincere, heartfelt advice. How does that sound?
Done in love. Absolutely done in love. I don't presume to tell you how to run your church. I would never do such a thing. This could be general advice even given to other churches as well. But I just feel like I could make some recommendations just to say, hey, I love you guys, but maybe you could make adjustments here or there, or maybe reconsider things and stuff like that. Yeah.
Let's do it.
All right. Let's do it.
Let's start. Where are we going to start?
I don't have it written down, but I just thought of it. And one of them is keep Mormonism weird, right? I think one of the things that I love about Mormonism is that it is different. And I was talking to an anthropologist on the plane on my way here, and he's here for a conference, and he thinks he might know Thomas Murphy, but he's in a kind of a different field of anthropology. And I told him, I said, dude, there's so many interesting things about Mormonism. I said, do you know that in Mormon folklore, they believe that Bigfoot is Cain? I said, come as an anthropologist, you got to really think that's like really interesting. And then I told him about how this, like within the Christian scriptures, we have Enoch is translated. He's taken up. But in Mormonism, it ain't just Enoch. It's the city of Enoch that gets translated. I said, we got this city floating around in space that will be returning one day. I said, now, I just go to this anthropologist and said, now, isn't that really cool? Like, doesn't that want to make you just kind of sit back and eat some popcorn and like, let's see how this tale unfolds, And I'm saying this, of course, I'm having fun here, but there are some unique, interesting ideas in folklore, within doctrine, within scriptures that is kind of just, it's imaginative. It's interesting. I'm a big science fiction guy. So somebody who likes sci-fi likes, the idea of cities floating in space is kind of a sci-fi idea too. So just keep Mormonism weird. Don't try to, we talked about correlation, how it's kind of just kind of taken the life out of so many of the, the ability to just think out loud and explore ideas and concepts and have a little fun with it too. People should have the freedom to be able to do that. So don't try to make yourself just make yourself like a mainline Protestant church and try to get to be just like us. You got to retain, that's part of your legacy. What makes you unique? It's the weirdness that an outsider would look at and say, that is really weird. But it's also very interesting as well. So that's just one thing that comes off the top of my head.
So on the one hand, I agree with you. I remember Michael Quinn once saying that when the Mormon Church started backing off the teaching that men could become gods, that Michael Quinn described that as selling your birthright for a mess of porridge. That was at a Sunstone that I attended. And also, now it's really topical because right now in March of 2022, Mormon apostles and First Presidency members are going around the U.S. church and saying, stop talking about Mother in Heaven. And that, because obviously it provides a lot of theological problems for the church, and it's embarrassing, and it empowers women and all sorts of things. So on the one hand, I guess I'm torn. On the one hand, I'm like, yeah, keep it weird. What you're backing off the things that made Mormonism cool to me when I was growing up, and that could be the way that you positively differentiate yourself. On the other hand, these are anti-Christian, anti-Bible teachings.
Yeah,
that there's a mother God, that men can become God. I mean, that was the whole basis for the God makers. That so, like, do you have limits to the weirdness that you want Mormonism to preserve?
There's limits to the weirdness, but also there are ways, tools that Orthodox Christianity can engage some of these different ideas as well. So, like the idea of men becoming gods, there is, like, within Christian ideas, especially within Eastern Orthodoxy, the idea of like apotheosis or theosis, that you are kind of become like a god in that sense. So when Mormons say that you can become like a god, and in a very literal sense, how it's portrayed is, yes, definitely problematic to Christianity. But some of the weird things can also offer avenues of conversation that we can try to maybe look at what Mormonism can bring to the table within their concepts and philosophies they brought. So let's talk about apotheosis and these things, and then have an interesting conversation philosophically on a metaphysical level. What can Mormonism bring to the table to introduce ideas to Christianity that make us rethink things and look at things from a different perspective? So it could be valuable in that way. But I also think that, yeah, there are things that obviously aren't, biblical, aren't Christian. But that's what differentiates Mormonism from Christianity as well. So like you said, like, I'm torn, because on one hand, I want to keep Mormonism weird, but I also want to have Mormonism move in a direction that's comes more in a Protestant evangelical view, but also try to retain its heritage and the weirdness. Because look, I've come from the charismatic renewal movement, Pentecostal movement. We have some crazy stories that we tell too. And that's part of our heritage as well. So I just think you kind of embrace the weird stuff. I embrace the weird. I mean, some of the stuff just embarrasses me. It's very cringy, but I also know that's part of the heritage that I belong to, and I don't think I should whitewash it.
Are you bothered by the idea of Heavenly Mother?
So the only way Heavenly Mother works is if the Mormons want to embrace talks with Catholics and say, Mother in Heaven's Mary. That would be one way within one aspect of Christianity that you could say that you could make an argument. The problem, see, that's becomes the problem with the literalism, having God with flesh and bone. Because within the Christian concept, because we believe that God is spirit, we believe that he has both masculine and feminine attributes, right? Because we're all created in his image. And so he has all aspects of humanity as well, within that. So he's going to have a masculine side, he's going to have a feminine side. And this is our meager attempt to try to describe the divine, the God, right? So the words that I would even use to express it are very inadequate. But when you give God a body, then now the divine attributes of God, the feminine attributes of God, has to be given a body as well.
Right.
And so that's one of the issues that you run into, whereas we don't have that problem. But if you have God with a body of flesh and blood, then it demands that you have a Heavenly Mother within Mormon theology. It doesn't make sense if there isn't, or if you don't acknowledge it, then you're taking away part of the story of who God is and what the nature of God is within a Mormon, framework and concept. So
I love it. Okay. What's next? Next suggestion.
Okay. So, one of the things like we talked about last time was like opening up the worship services. Like, it is so dry and very non-expressive and very non-interesting. And worship is our encounter with worship is about bringing heaven down into earth, like a piece of heaven. And you're engaging things in a divine way. And when I'm in heaven, man, I want to celebrate. And I think worship is bringing down heaven into earth and having this make a joyful noise, sing and shout, clap your hands, raise your hands, be expressive. And I think that is so important. Look, we even see it in modern Judaism to this day, the way they dance, and it's very joyful. It's a joyful exercise. And see, worship should be both a joyful exercise, but also, where the praise and worship and all that, and then also just acknowledgement that how much we love God and everything like that, and we appreciate what Jesus did for us at the cross. That should be a celebration. I think you lose something when you try to just make it into like a monotone. It's just going through the motions.
Reverent.
You're basically just doing the same thing every Sunday, repeating the same thing. Maybe just the songs are different. When I was with the Church of Jesus Christ services, man, their services are set up very similar. But what they do is, okay, play hymn. Let's do hymn number 231. They don't even plan what hymns they're going to play. The pastors don't even plan they don't even know who's going to preach that morning. Everything is done and guided by the Spirit. And actually, the Book of Mormon tells us that all the services, that's how they should be conducted. And so I think that you need the idea of spontaneity, openness to the Holy Spirit to enter into the service, like really engage, and then actually have a manifestations of the Holy Spirit. You're not able to do that if you're not worshiping on a level that is opening up the idea of having the divine enter into the service, allow the Spirit to enter in, because it's preparatory. Right. You're preparing your hearts and to hear the word, but also to encounter the Spirit. And the best way we can do it is through praise and worship. And I think you miss out on something when you take a key element, a part of Christianity is giving thanks and praise to the Lord, and doing it in an animated way. If you want to clap your hands, if you want to raise your hands, heck, if you want to dance, guess what? It's all in the Bible. It's all scriptural. And I think that's how really, I think they should open up and give more freedom of worship in this church services.
What's interesting about that, like when Margie and I and the kids weren't able to attend the Mormon church anymore, we started going to other churches, and I attended South Mountain Church, here. And there's this idea of a spiritual language, but I think it's just conditioning personally, where like when I attend South Mountain and they've got a rock band up there and a preacher that's charismatic, it's not like it's like, for me, it's not like I'm home, and I'm not criticizing.
Oh yeah, no.
I'm just saying, for me, feeling at home spiritually, I've been conditioned to associate quiet and reverent and solemn as like spirituality for me.
Yeah.
And like, for me, the most spiritual moments in Mormonism are singing hymns in a choir, or like at General Conference where we're all standing and singing, and the Mormon Tabernacle Choir is singing. That has become my spiritual language. Even now, if I go sit in General Conference, hear the Motab Choir sing, or music in the spoken word comes on, or whatever it's called now, that speaks to me. And when I go to, any other non-Mormon denominational church, I feel kind of empty. It feels like I'm cheating. It feels, and I'm not saying, again, it's not a criticism.
Yeah.
It's just like, what if it's just, if they were to make those changes you recommend, would that actually be good for the members? Or would the members go, well, all of a sudden the church is getting weird, and it's like, it's starting to feel more like Joel Osteen than Mormonism. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Do you guys, Jen, do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah. I remember someone I met once that was FLDS, and then they switched over to mainstream Mormonism. But they said one of the things that they missed was singing hymns, because they would sing them loud in their services, even though they were the same hymns that we sing in our church.
The more
in the
expressive.
church. Yeah. They would sing them loud and move, and he missed that, he said.
That's interesting. I didn't know that about the FLDS. I appreciate hearing something like that, learn something like that. That's cool. Yeah, so I get what you're saying. And this is the thing, though, too, is like I am not a real big fan of like a modern evangelical contemporary worship.
You're not a Joel Osteen fan?
No, I'm not a Joel Osteen
Rick
fan.
Warren? How about Rick Warren?
No, not a big fan. No, I'm not really a big fan of a lot of your main evangelical. I think
churches.
No, I mean, I've attended mega churches. I helped start one, and I've been involved and plugged into that world. But there is a certain vapidness. It's very superficial. It's like singing love songs to Jesus type kind of thing that I don't really care for. I just think that when I don't require a drum set, I don't require smoke machines when I'm talking about worship and stuff like that. But what I'm saying is, it's actually about freedom, to have the freedom to be able to do it. So if your preference is to just sing hymns very quietly, and if that what is comfortable for you, and that's where you get nourishment from that, that is what works for you. But if there's other people that want to sway, that want to make a joyful noise, that want to be more participatory in the worship service, I think we should have freedom and liberty in Christ to be able to worship him in whatever way we want to express it. But by making it homogeneous and all the same and just monotonous, I don't see what we could get anything out of that.
Yeah, because we got to a point where like even the instruments are like only certain instruments.
No trumpets, you know, like no guitars.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I do remember when they took out guitars, because there used to be guitars in sacrament.
Yeah.
Like they would play the guitar sometimes.
Acoustic,
and now it's
not
just,
electric.
but then they just moved to, I think I've only seen like violins and pianos in the last little bit.
Yeah. And well, even it can be just the smallest thing. Like I remember growing up in Mexico in the church, we would have the normal 3 hymns, at the beginning, the sacrament hymn, and then the for the end. But then growing up, we had even like a middle hymn, and everyone would stand up in sacrament meeting and sing that. But I don't know if at some point they took that out of the handbook. And I remember when my dad was in the stake presidency, they made it their mission to end that, to make sure no bishop was enforcing or doing like the intermediate hymn.
The rest hymn.
Yeah, the rest hymn.
They call that the rest hymn. Yeah.
And I mean, that was probably one of the most interesting parts of it all, because everyone stands up and sings, and
if you're getting feeling nappy, you wake up and sing a hymn, and it kind of wakes you up.
Right. Yeah. So it has become really legalistic, where like the same, like you mentioned the episode before, the same way it is being done in Utah has to be done in Mexico and everywhere else.
I actually believe that's true, Gerardo. That's important. Thank you for that. I really think the reason why the church backed off its charismatic impulses is because I think Hiram Page is the guy. Like, remember when Joseph Smith was translating, and then somebody else wants to translate with the seer stone, and Joseph's like, "Hey, there's only one prophet here." It's like if you start, and this relates to Denver Snuffer too, and his teaching that you can have your own personal relationship with Jesus and actually get a witness of Jesus for yourself. Like, as soon as members start feeling spiritually empowered, then they start getting their own revelations for what's good for them. And so the more you're encouraging speaking of tongues, prophecy, visions, healing, all the charismatic gifts, and just more intense, even spiritual experiences, maybe you lose a little bit of control.
Yeah, I think that was early on. I even tell people very early on, Joseph basically asserts that, no, it's only him. Also, when he first starts encountering tongue speech in Kirtland with Black Pete is the only name we have. He was an African-American gentleman who spoke in tongues apparently in Kirtland, and Joseph put the kibosh on that, which of course then Brigham would show up on the scene. He'd start speaking in tongues. Maybe some people say, well, maybe because this Brigham was white, that he made it more acceptable. But yeah, this idea that of control, but that goes back to how we discussed before. There's this impulse within organizations. It's not just the LDS Church. Almost all churches have what you could look at as that beginning spark where there was this spontaneity and there was this move of the Spirit, and then it just slowly but surely gets clamped down, controlled. So I think this is a human impulse. I don't think this is just the church.
No,
I think this is a human impulse.
Church ever.
Yeah, basically. That's what happens. Yeah. And so see, I'm a radical Protestant. I'm a libertarian. So I'm not going to let any organization dictate to me how I'm going to worship and encounter him and engage him. And so anybody that gets in the way of me being able to do that, I'm just going to say, no, it's me and him, man. No mediators. And if I'm going to worship him any way that I see fit.
Yeah, and if at the end the church interest is to point people to Jesus, should the church really be interested about not being a rest hymn and not having people being a little bit more charismatic? Like, is that, You know,
I think the
focus is
modern
on
Mormon
Jesus.
church sees itself as the intermediary between the members and Jesus. I really do. Just bishops. The fact that your repentance isn't between you and Jesus. Repentance is between you and your bishop, right? And even temple, you have to pay your tithing to the church, or you can't get the most important ordinances. Like, I think the church just really needs to be in between you. No, and I'm not saying this for nefarious reasons. I think they're sincere. They're just like, hey, trust us. You know, we understand Jesus best. We'll help you have the right relationship with Jesus.
Yeah.
Maybe Gerardo? I mean,
No, I agree with that.
yeah.
Yeah. So
I mean, they are special witnesses of Christ. The Mormon apostles call themselves special witnesses, which means better than everyone else in the world, basically.
I mean, that's how an outsider would certainly perceive it. That's what the claim that they're making, and so that they wonder why other groups might be a little offended by them. You know, that might be part of the reason that they're making these claims. You know, I got on this list here. Actually, I think that I can combine a few things here, and that is more freedom of thought and conscience, make the word of wisdom voluntary, and make tithing voluntary. And I think that all ties into a theme here, which is you got to give more autonomy to the individual. One of the interesting concepts within Mormonism is free agency. But what good is free agency if you don't have any choices to make, right? So I think when I wrote down these three ideas is that within Protestantism, the idea there's a notion of individualism and in the individual's relationship with Jesus Christ, but also the idea that you make the choices, you choose how to engage these things, and then Jesus gives you liberty. You have liberty in Christ to do things, whether, originally the word of wisdom was not mandatory. It was not, you could enter the temple and not practice the word of wisdom. And then they made it into a rule that in order to enter into a holy place, you had to follow the word of wisdom and also tithe. And so you're basically telling people the only way you can be in a holy place is that you've got to give up a lot of your autonomy and free agency to be there, which seems to be counter to one of the more interesting doctrines of Mormonism, which is free agency. And word of wisdom was voluntary, tithing was voluntary. All these things that I'm mentioning to you is already baked. It was there from the beginning. That was already there. So those are ideas that they could just re-embrace, and I think it would just be good and healthy for people to be able to make their own choices.
Yeah, especially with word of wisdom. It's so weird that like along the Wasatch Front, people are addicted to like 82-ounce Diet Coke beverages, but a cup of coffee or a glass of green tea or whatever is like will keep you out of your eternal salvation in Mormonism.
How many people drink Monster energy drinks instead of coffee? And that stuff's just so full of chemicals. It's not healthy. And all the science has come forth now. And this is the thing, like, why can't we look at science and also God gave us the word and he also gave us creation to inform us. Well, the creation or science informs us that tea's good for you, coffee's good for you, wine's good for you. These are not harmful things. Anything in excess can be a problem, but that just makes sense. But these are actually helpful things that can be helpful to you. And so I think that I don't really see the purpose. Coffee drinking is so innocuous. I've been drinking it since I was a young child, and to just make it this barrier that
to
prevents
eternal salvation.
Yeah. Yeah. Like you can't progress. You're stuck. I mean, you're hanging with me. You're not progressing, right? You'll be hanging out with us lesser beings, if you will, or lesser people. But again, it just comes to the concept of like, there's an idea of free agency within Mormonism. And I kind of like some of the concepts that they talk about, but then it's almost like we're going to bring this doctrine into the fold, and it's going to be part of who we are. But then we're going to take a lot of it away from you. And it just seems like it doesn't make sense to me.
On the one hand, this idea of getting rid of the coffee prohibition makes a lot of sense. Like I'm thinking about my mission in Guatemala. You try and tell a Latino, not just Latinos, but definitely in Latin America, you're teaching the discussions, everything's going great. And then you're like, no café. And they're like, what? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
or in Germany, no beer.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Like at least sometimes you have to boil the water just to make it clean. And cafe is the way you get your hydration in some parts of at least Guatemala.
Yeah.
So to tell them they can't have their morning cafe is just ridiculous. But so that's on the one hand, I think you probably might get more baptisms meaningfully, but you would lose all the Mormons that say, wait a minute, if that was revelation for 150, 200 years, now they're changing it. What else did you get wrong? So Stephen, I'm not arguing and debating you for these, but on that one, no coffee, no tea, no tobacco, no alcohol. That's so interwoven into the Mormon identity at this point. It seems like if the church changed that, they would lose way more people, current members, who are saying like, you're just caving to social pressure. Like you're basically saying that the past prophets, seers, and revelators were wrong.
Well, but see, this is the key thing. I said voluntary. In other words, these are guidelines we're giving you.
Oh, yeah.
How it was in the beginning.
Right.
Like
We're going back. Okay.
Yeah. Exactly. So we're just going back to how we used to do it. It's a voluntary thing. These are things that we would recommend to you, but you're giving them the freedom to make that choice. So if a person chooses that they have the conviction that they feel that they need to follow the word of the wisdom, and that actually benefits them, because actually having denial to self in some areas can be a good exercise. You know, like when people give up something for Lent and all these kind of things, give the idea of sacrifice. But these all have to be exercised on an individual level.
Yeah.
It has to be a choice that you're making, because then it becomes voluntary, and then it becomes real, because you are making a sacrifice that you have the option to do these things, but you choose not to. And I actually think that can be more spiritually fulfilling to you as well. But man, I'll tell you, I mean, sometimes a cup of coffee can really do you a lot of good first thing in the morning. I heartily recommend it. And so I'm just saying, drink coffee too. I mean, it's awesome. But you should have the freedom and liberty in Christ to be able to exercise your options and not be put under condemnation or looked down upon because you have a different conviction about a particular thing.
There are rumors every 6 months that the church is going to make coffee okay on Reddit. You see those. And if you think about it, the church has already allowed missionaries to call home weekly now. That's a huge change, because ask all the people that were only able to call home twice a year.
My parents were not even able to call their parents at all because their mission president wouldn't allow it.
So when the church makes a change like that, it makes every former missionary say, why did I have to go, 6 months to call my parents when now, and then just caffeine when the church allows Coke and cola beverages. So, I mean, the church is making some of these changes that were core to our identity. So maybe they'll do it. And maybe it'll be because of you, Steven.
You're a prophet.
Look in the camera and tell them. Do it. Steven said so. Okay. Now what's next?
Well, and then just tied, like even the idea of like the tithing, making that voluntary too. See, because I think the principle of tithing can be a good thing, right? Because the idea is that it makes you have a budget, and you're going to put something aside, a sacrificial thing that you're putting aside. And you made that decision to do that. And I think that's fundamental, is that you're making that decision. And so you're doing this, and you're doing it with a grateful heart, that you're doing it as something this is what you want to do. You're not being forced to do it. God loves a cheerful giver, right? Yeah. And so I think that you need to give people the opportunity to make the decision whether they're going to tithe or not, and give them that freedom, and don't make it as a bar of an entrance to be able to encounter go and enter into a holy place within the context of the restoration. It seems arbitrary. I don't know if you know this, but it wasn't that long ago. It was just, there was a period of time when it was voluntary or wasn't even really practiced. Yeah. But now it's become like you have to pay admission. Yeah. To go into the temple.
I think before Lorenzo's it was more voluntary.
It was more voluntary.
It was not.
And even, was it Joseph F. Smith that said that once we get the church back in financial shape, that we could actually then, the goal would be to eventually eliminate the need entirely to have tithing within the church. So even then you could say that, you could argue that within the context of the restoration, that you could say that tithing could be a voluntary thing, and it was only meant to be for a period of time that it was to be practiced in such a way.
Right.
But now that the church has obviously been blessed by having substantial amounts of money and revenues, that maybe the time has come for them to just say, well, you know what? We think you can be blessed by doing tithing, but that's a choice that you can make. So the concept of tithing is still there. All the good that one could get out of it is there, but it's no longer forcing somebody to do it, thus taking away their free agency to be able to make those informed choices on their own.
Yeah. Well, if you were talking to any member today, they would say, well, tithing is voluntarily in our church. You know, like you don't have to pay tithing. But I think what you're talking about is don't make it a sin not to pay tithing, right? Because right now it would be considered a sin to not pay tithing. But if it's just something that you give out of your heart, it's not a commandment per se to do it, you know, and so rigid and legalistic.
Yeah. And it is, because I come from, there's a lot of churches within the movement I'm in that also advocate tithing, and they'll even say you're stealing from God if you don't tithe.
Yeah.
Well, I don't like that. That's manipulation.
Yeah.
That's taken away. The people need to make that choice on their own and not do it because they have to or because they're afraid that they're stealing from God. That's just not the God I serve.
And I don't mean to have a rebuttal to every one of these,
Yes.
but I just have to.
I love it.
I'm trying to think about the church's perspective, and I think that it's a well-established fact in sociology that the more you require of your adherents, the more committed they are to your organization. So the lower demand religions have less devotion of the members. And I think the church would worry, like obviously right now the church could live off the interest of its investments and fund its full budget. So they literally don't need the tithing of the members. Now, who doesn't want more money? Everybody wants more money. But I wonder if the main reason they wouldn't take your suggestion would be because it would ultimately weaken the membership's commitment to the church, because you actually care more about something you invest in.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. But, and this is the thing, because I'm an individualist, I'm thinking about the individual's relationship with God and how important it is to enable people to have that personal relationship, because I think that's fundamental to the Christian walk, is to have your personal relationship with Jesus Christ. And if you are stipulating all these rules and regulations and and you have to do this, and this, it takes away so much. I'm just saying, I'm like, when I say advice, I'm saying like, I'm also looking out for the spiritual welfare of the individuals within the church. Oh,
like ethics and spirituality?
Well, I just think that those things are important. I think that, and so, yeah, I mean, I understand what you're saying, John. And of course, from a business sense, from a bureaucracy sense, from a corporate sense, yeah, obviously making it voluntary could hurt the bottom line and stuff like that. But I'm trying to just like approach this as though we're trying to help people on their spiritual journey in ways that we can help them become better Christians, better people, and by giving them more choices and more freedom in Christ to be able to make these decisions on their own, it enables them to actually have a better, I think, relationship with Jesus and with the church and with all these things, because it's not about necessarily following all these rules and regulations, but it's about just pursuing a relationship that I think is really important. So I'm thinking like the spiritual welfare as well when I'm making these suggestions.
So you're trying to be more like Jesus.
Well, I strive. I think everybody should strive to try to be more like Jesus, right?
I agree.
Yep.
All right. Well, let's hit transparency and wealth, because those are both on your list.
Yeah. So I think it's really important in the society, and actually it's very interesting. We're seeing this with the younger generation, the upcoming crop of young people, is that they want authenticity and they want transparency, right? So I think this would actually be good advice for us to consider, for all churches to consider, Look, I've been involved in many churches and many organizations where you have the megachurch pastor, and then you have his father on the board and a bunch of yes men on the board, and they don't open up the books. You don't know what's really going on. You notice that the pastor is driving these very nice cars, and they have and there's no transparency whatsoever. And I tell people that if you can't look at the books, then you shouldn't you shouldn't give them any money. That's just a general word of advice for any church, like across the board. If you can't look at the books, then there's no transparency. You don't know where your money is going. It's, tithing and giving is kind of an investment that you're making in the kingdom, but but because it is, you made those contributions, you should have a right to be able to have access to what they're doing. And I honestly think that would be good, because people want transparency. They want authenticity. People, that's one of the most important things with these people looking for charities and philanthropy, is that they really think it's important to have an organization that just opens up the books and say, okay, here we are. This is all that we have. And then you make the decision if you want to make sow a seed or make an investment into our enterprise, our ministry of what we're trying to do. So yeah, I think those kind of things are very, very important. Yeah.
Okay. So be more financially transparent.
Yep.
And then going along with that, the wealth.
Yeah. So one of my biggest criticisms that I have of the Catholic Church is that they have all of this wealth. People say, well, we have all these priceless treasures and all this beautiful stuff. And I'm like, sell it.
Feed the poor.
You can feed the poor. I tell it to Catholics all the time. I mean, it's like, strip the altars of their gold and all that. Use a plain table. Let's get back to just more of an authentic faith. Let's not focus on the materialism that all the wealth and all the all these things and this art. Look, there are plenty of people that will buy these things and they'll be put on display and taken care of, and people would have access to these things. But so my whole thing is that, actually one thing I'll give Rick Warren credit for is that he does reverse tithing, where he gives away 90% as opposed to, so instead of giving 10%, he gives 90%. So maybe that could be a model that we could all follow, that we as individuals, we could choose to give 10%, but the churches themselves should basically give 90% of their away for ministry, but also for feeding the hungry, for providing, maybe education for undereducated people, address homelessness within the communities, these kind of things. That just imagine the sheer amount of wealth that the Catholic Church has, how it would really be transformative in many places. And so maybe the second largest church in the second most wealthiest church in the world could also emulate such a pattern, that it could, because again, like somebody was telling me, well, we have all this wealth because think about it. We were blessed. It was a bishop. He's a good friend of mine, and I like you, and I had him on my program. But he's trying to sell me on why it was great that the church had over $100-something billion.
Right now, Ensign Peak has over $150 million $150 billion in management, cash, stocks, bonds, real estate, and that's not even counting other investments that we don't know about and the core assets of the church. So it's certainly a $500 billion church, if on the way to being $1 trillion church.
Yeah. And so like where I come from, Florida, they own about 2 or 3% of the property in Florida. So
the Mormon church,
it does absolutely
owns 2 to 3% of Florida.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that is true. So, but this person was trying to tell me, well, think of how we were able to get when Corona broke out, we were able to get our missionaries back home right away. And I'm like, yeah, but you could have done that if you had $10 billion. Right. You don't need 150 billion or whatever, or whatever hundreds of billions, that you could still have a church that has wealth.
And missionaries pay too, monthly. So that's not even a good argument.
Because I even thought but
they pay $400 or $500 a month.
Mm-hmm. Right. I think he was just, and so it just seemed like that was his main pitch. And I was kind of like, okay, well, all right, but that doesn't quite work for me, right? Because I think that we're trying to be restorationists here. We want to emulate the first century church. And I think that when we look at what they were doing early on, it was not about building, wealth and assets and stuff like that. It was about preaching the good news, spreading the gospel, spreading the love of Christ and sharing the gospel message with people. And that was the underlying mission of the church. For any church, I'm talking about mega church pastors. I'm talking about all you people out there with all these big buildings and you're driving your nice cars. I mean, that doesn't seem like anything Jesus would do. So this is just a general criticism across the board of just about almost all churches, that they need to reassess what they're doing with all this wealth that they have access to.
So so you would say if you had $100 billion church, you wouldn't go to Africa where a little village where they didn't have much and ask them to pay tithing or ask them to pay more in fast offerings or tithing than was already asked of them.
Right. Yeah. So that's right. That's good. Of course. Yeah. I know what you're talking about here. Yeah. And that's the thing is like, I mean, you can teach principles of tithing that could be beneficial to people. Right. Mm-hmm. But I also think that, we have to acknowledge the poverty in this world, and poverty is such a horrible thing. Right. And it's generational. It's integrated as part, we have people in this country that poverty, generation after generation of poverty and poverty and poverty. And I think we have to, because the role of the church is to look out and care for the poor, I think it's much better that we provide for them because they're not able to provide for themselves. And so I think we're the purpose of giving and tithing and ministry is to help those very people that by making a tithe, it could be very devastating to their situation because they have access to limited amount of food, access to very little medical care. And so I think the priority should be is that let's invest in them and help them and not require them. But then when the time comes that after they've been blessed and maybe they've been able to step out of poverty, that then they can then bless other people by also giving as well. But I just think the whole idea of one of the fundamental principles to Christianity is to care for the poor. And if somebody is in poverty and they really feel a conviction to tithe, because we know about the widow's mite and all that kind of stuff, right? If somebody does want to make a sacrifice, that's their personal choice that they can make. But I don't like the idea of making poor people feel like they have to give something when they really can't give it away.
And again, it's because you literally can't go to the temple. You can't get married in the temple. You can't get your endowments in the Mormon church unless you pay your tithes and offerings. So it's basically
you can't have an eternal family is what they're saying.
Yeah.
You
Right.
can't have an eternal family unless you pay your tithing.
Yeah.
So the churches, I don't think they think they're doing this. I don't think it's intentional, but they're basically selling salvation. So they're selling salvation.
Well, and I mean, that's a theological thing that's going on here because, the importance of, getting into the temple and doing these rites, none of these things are very relevant to me, but within the context of a member, I think you have to give some leeway to people and give some flexibility saying, if this person wants to proceed, that we should give them, we should accept that they are not able to tithe now, but if they get blessed and we're able to bless these people, the time may come where they could bless others and bless the church as well. And to not grant access to people, I don't know, it seems kind of, I don't know. I just think that it doesn't seem very Christ-like, right? I think Christ would openly let these people come,
Right.
and engage them and have them be part of the whole process, right? So,
And this is where the Book of Mormon and the Bible agree, because the Book of Mormon is very anti-wealth and anti-materialism. King Benjamin's speech, right?
Yeah,
it's just what does it say?
yeah,
Better than me.
Just about like he made a comment about gold. You should give up all your gold and stuff like that. And I told my mom, my grandmother, her mother. I told my mom, I said she would love King Benjamin's speech because she felt the very same way not about accumulating wealth and all these kind of things and about giving. And I said, there's a lot of themes within King Benjamin's sermon that would resonate with what I agree with too. And my grandmother, who was never was about building these things up, but it was about giving. Just you get something, you just give it away. You just give and give and give and bless people. And that's kind of like the more Christ-like thing to do. And so the spirit of King Benjamin is something that, you could follow within your scriptures, I think. And then of course, what did Jesus say? He said, if you want to follow me, give up everything, give up all your wealth and just come follow me. And some people don't want to do that.
He was speaking in parable. He was speaking in metaphor.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but he was also making a point. Like, if you're going to follow me, then, you might have to make sacrifices. But again, you're making the choice to make those sacrifices as well. You're making that decision. Again, and the idea is what he's trying to say is that, wealth and the accumulation of wealth is a temporal thing. It's not an eternal thing. It's not, that's what he's trying to tell us. It's about us as human beings loving each other, looking out for each other, and not be pursuing wealth at the expense of our fellow human beings as well, because often that's also what happens too.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think going along with that is you have opening parts of temple to community, homeless shelter, or rec center. You want to talk about that next?
Yeah. So when you consider that you're building these state-of-the-art facilities and everything like that, if you look at the original temples, they often kind of were like community centers, and that they were open to the public. As a matter of fact, they even had dances in the Nauvoo temple, right? So it seems to me like by closing them off totally is kind of a waste of resources, because here you have, like back in the day, in the medieval times, the very center of the community was the cathedral, right? And that was like the center and the heart of the community. And if you were to emulate that within the contents of the temple, that it's not just a temple for baptisms of the dead, but it's also a temple for the living today, and make it a place that's alive with people all the time. In other words, I'm not saying open up the entire temple. I'm saying open up parts of the temple to the public, so that if there's homeless and they need a place to sleep at night, the temple can be a place that they could go to. If there's youth, you could have youth programs, and you could make it part, because again, these are huge buildings. They have all this room, and you could devote some of it as a community service. Like, this is our holy place. This is very sacred to us, but because we want to be good neighbors, we want to open up part of our temple to the community to serve as a beacon of life, of place of where the children of God can come and interact with each other, but also for places where if people need help or whatever, if they need a place to stay that night, that it'd be open to them. I think it would just be a real blessing to the community, and it would then, I think, be helpful for the images of the church, because it would be great PR, but it also, I think, would have spiritual significance, because then it becomes a place that people would look, not just Mormons, but other people would look as a good place, a place that's welcoming to all, and a place that, they're not just building a building for a building's sake or just to do certain things and keep everybody out, that they're allowing a certain degree of openness to the temples and utilizing them in a way would be helpful. And I have a friend, David Hall, who he tried to build that big city in Vermont, platted out with Joseph's plans, and then of course they all freaked out about it. But he even talks about like opening up the temples where you could actually have them do the temples service, and then you would remove everything that's out of there, and then the Baptists could have their services in there as well. So it'd be a multi-use packages. So there are people of the Latter-day Saint tradition that can also see the utility of using temple space more effectively than it is being used today.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at what Russell M. Nelson, the current Mormon prophet's legacy is right now, it's building a gazillion temples.
Right.
And they're not just temples, they're super expensive buildings. Mm-hmm. And I've always been uncomfortable with the wealth expended on these temples, even though they're beautiful. Mm-hmm. But then just kind of the waste of time that goes into like all this proxy work for the dead when there's real living need now. You don't have Jesus saying, listen, all my disciples, Sermon on the Mount, what you really need to do is go get baptized for dead people and go do temple endowments for dead people and go get sealed over and over and over and over again for dead people. Jesus never said that, What did he say? Feed the hungry, clothe the naked, take care of the poor.
Right.
So like in some sense, it's bad enough, in my opinion, that Mormon temples are kind of a huge waste of time, although I know it's because I don't believe the theology.
Right.
But it adds insult to injury for me that they're just so freaking, $50, $100 million buildings when that money might be used in different ways.
Yeah. And so I'm trying to create a way in which we can still have the temples and the expenditures used in them, but also try to and recognize the importance of the sacred things that happen within the temple that are very important to people, And I acknowledge that. I don't agree with the theology of the temple and what goes on in there on a theological level, but I also think that if you then also see, it always seemed weird to me that you can't go in. I'm a Christian. Why can't I come in there, right? But if you could at least say, look, we open the door in a way that we're doing our sacred ceremonies, and they're very important to us, but there's another sacred duty that we have, and that is to love our neighbor and to be Christ-like and help the community, and that the temple can be a beacon, not only a beacon to LDS folk who are there to do their sacred ordinances, but also be a beacon of hope to all in the community, to know that if somebody's there, they could point to the temples, go to the temple, and they will help you.
Yeah.
You know, and then it could be a place that's a giving place and a place that people could look at as a place that practices Christian, you know, the Christ-like attributes, and it'll be viewed as something that could be central to the community, as opposed to a place that they're not allowed to go into. It's verboten, and then they're just the community's cut off from it, especially in areas where it's mixed. You know,
I think that sounds beautiful.
Yeah,
cool.
It's a great suggestion. I actually don't have a rebuttal for that one.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. All right. Okay. So where do we want to go next?
All right. So the next one that I have is embracing the cross. And that's for my high school Mormon brain, for my CES trained Mormon brain. I was trained to think the cross is evil, that it's bad. The cross, you know, the line is the cross represents the dead Christ, but Mormons believe in the living Christ. So to in any way use the cross is like an insult to Jesus, basically.
Yeah, yeah. The great irony, of course, is that the cross was used in the 19th century church.
The 19th century LDS church?
LDS church, absolutely.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I identified the oldest extent. I identified one of the oldest extent pieces of art that feature Book of Mormon art when I had Devin Jensen come on my program, and he told me, "Yeah, we've got these panoramas that were painted in 1871." I was like, "Dude, those are the oldest paintings of the Book of Mormon," because Chris Thomas had originally identified the oldest one being 1874 with David Hiram's painting. And because I had that knowledge, I'm like, dude, the church that I just identified it. So we came on and we talked about, well, what was so interesting was that these were panoramas that were used as proselytizing tools to the Native Americans in Utah. So what it did was it told the story of the Book of Mormon, but also told the story of Jesus in the old world, and also Jesus coming to the new world as well. It's actually kind of cool that the paintings are quite stunning. And it has a crucifixion scene in it, and it has Jesus nailed to the cross. It looks very Catholic. And it's like, and it's written that Brigham Young had seen this panorama also. So we know that a prophet saw this, didn't have a problem with it, and thought the use of the cross as a proselytizing tool was perfectly legitimate. And the other thing, speaking of Brigham Young, we have photos of many of his wives, and many of them are wearing crosses. So the idea of the cross in the LDS church is not a foreign concept. And I think when I say embrace the cross, because see, like we're told in scripture that the cross can be a stumbling block. And I almost feel like the cross is a stumbling block, and it should be something that's embraced, right? And, you know, like as Protestant, now I come from an evangelical tradition where some would say, well, we have an empty cross, because we talk about the risen Christ. The Catholics have Christ on the cross. And so that's how we differ. So there's a little similar retort that they would make. Now, I don't embrace that, because I think that the story of the atonement, resurrection, all what Jesus did at the cross is important. So Christ's suffering on the cross can be an acknowledgement, a remembrance of what he did for us at the cross. The empty cross can represent that he is a risen Christ. And it's an important thing, because the cross is radical, because you're literally taking something where God was killed, if you will, or Jesus was killed, and you're actually making it the symbol of your faith, and that is representative of how Jesus is defeated death, right? So you're taking an instrument of death and you're making it into an instrument of life, and then it also makes you contemplate what Jesus did at the cross, and it's a beautiful symbol. It's a powerful symbol. It's a symbol that was used in the early LDS church. And I think if you want to be able to create better relations with the rest of the Christian world, I think a great step forward would be embracing the cross. It would be a real important thing you did. But again, it's part of your history. It's part of your heritage. It's already there. It's not something that's foreign to the church. It's already been there. And I think it would be a great, just a great thing if they really want to have conversations with both groups. And that's one of the things that the church is trying to do. Embrace the cross.
I love it. Okay. That goes against the grain of my Mormon upbringing, but it certainly would unify. And I do think it's insulting to say that the cross represents the dead Christ. That's just symbols can mean whatever they want to.
Right.
So
and
it is kind of, it's unnecessarily separating themselves from the rest of the Christian world, which I think more than ever right now, the church wants to be a part of broader Christianity.
That's right. And that's not how we see the cross.
Yeah.
So you're defining our symbol in a way that we don't even recognize. And that's not really cool.
That's not a good faith interpretation.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, this is a fun one, and I think I know where you're going here. You have Make Relief Society autonomous again. That's a fun one.
Yeah.
I know where you're going there, but tell us.
Well, I think that
people don't know Mormons generally don't know the history of their own relief society.
Right.
So you may have to. Greg Prince talked about this, but you may have to fill.
Well, I mean, basically I should say
evangelicals and our Christian viewers know Mormonism better than us. So they know what you're about to say. It's Mormons that don't know what you're about to say.
I really don't know how many evangelicals know this. Maybe the ones that watch your program do. They're probably pretty hardcore deep in the weeds in a lot of this stuff. But basically, it appears, and D. Michael Quinn makes it pretty clear, that the idea of the Relief Society was to kind of create an auxiliary, but also a separate organization that give full autonomy to the women to run the organization. And then he patterns it after the first presidency. And they were the ones that selected their leaders. They acted as though they were 70s in the way they did business. They had their own publications. They had their own editorials. You'd be very surprised that there are some publications that they put out in the even at the beginning of the 20th century. And I've read something in the 1930s Relief Society publication they put out that would not be printed today. Somebody even pointed it out. So they were actually given freedom freedom of press. So they could even be kind of critical at times, or they could give their own opinions on things. And so there was an idea that the Relief Society was for the women. It was run by the women. They had a great degree of autonomy. It was patterned after the first presidency. D. Michael Quinn likes to say that they actually had the priesthood in the context of the Relief Society was there. So I just think that when we look at where we're at now in the LDS Church with regards to women, it's a very difficult situation. But I think that by making the Relief Society more autonomous, I think it would solve a lot of the issues that are going on right now because there's more freedom and you feel like your voice is being heard, and that all would feel that they're equal participants in what's going on in the church, and in particular with what's going on within their organization. And I think that it would be just a good step because, again, this is all stuff that's already part of your heritage. Like, it's all there that you can follow these patterns, and it can also lead to reforms within your church that would put things in a positive direction. And it would, but again, I'm not making a whole lot of recommendations here that the church hasn't already done in its past. It's part of its history. It's part of of what is in your background. So I'm just trying to make comments and advice on things that you've already done it once before. It can be brought back and done again. And I think that when you allow more autonomy, you allow more free agency, you allow more liberty in Christ, you have more creativity, there's more vitality to an organization, and then you would have I think it would just be good for everybody. I think everybody benefits from more autonomy and more freedom and less control. I think that just makes sense to me. I mean, I think Mormonism in some of its doctrines, actually, it makes sense within the context of that as well.
And Jen, did you know that the Relief Society was its own autonomous, independent organization that had its own publications, that managed its own budget, had its own voice?
I did not.
And this is in the 40s, 30s, 40s, and 50s. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I did not know that.
Yeah. So
let's go back.
I think that would be a good idea to go back to those roots.
Yeah.
And I think that would actually not be hard to do. And I think it would be a good step for the LDS Church. So I would second Stephen's motion on that.
Okay, very good.
Awesome.
Making progress here.
All right. Yeah, I've got no rebuttals there. I think that would only help the church, honestly. Unless they started wanting to talk about Heavenly Mother. And then that'd be a problem because the church is not liking that these days.
You know that once in Relief Society on Mother's Day, I gave the prayer, and I said something about I said something to Heavenly Mother in my prayer, and I was never asked to give the prayer again in Relief Society in that ward.
How long ago was that?
That was, let's see, my oldest was just like maybe 2, so 23 years ago.
You were a rebel in embryo.
I guess. Yeah, and it wasn't even speaking right to her. I think I was thanking Heavenly Father for her, and I was silenced very fast after that.
Interesting.
Keep Mormonism weird, Steven Pynakker would say.
Yeah.
I'm sorry that happened, Jen.
That's okay.
Okay, so the next one we've talked about a bit, but we'll talk about it again. And I think the church has different strains of wanting to emphasize grace and wanting to emphasize obedience and works.
Yeah.
But what's your next one?
One of the things I said, fully embrace the cross, but also fully embrace grace, because I think that, especially within the Protestant context of Christianity, it's the idea of, it's not about what you do, and it's not about you earning your salvation. It's about you embracing what Jesus Christ did for you at the cross, accept him as your Savior. Know that it's a free gift of salvation that's offered to you. There's nothing that you did or that you could merit this. It was something that he's freely given to you. And so this is so important because this form of Christianity that's grace-based separates it from all the other religions in the world. Because basically every other religion in the world, in one sense, requires of you to do certain things.
Right.
Right? It's all works-based. It's all, or like in Hinduism, it's based on everything that you've done in past lives. It's all on you. And what Jesus did at the cross is so radical that it said, no, it's all on me. And so I think that's really the freeing aspect of grace-based Christianity, is that it's an openness to say that there's really nothing that you can do. It's more about what I can do for you, and I'm willingly sacrificing myself and just embrace the gift that I'm offering you. And like I said earlier, it's not the work that we do, it's the work that he does within us. And that's what grace is all about. So that's just kind of a tiny little thing there. But I think that, again, if the church wants to, Christianity is different because of that. That's what makes it so unique. And I think it'd be good for everyone to really start focusing on grace. Now, Jackson Washburn, he's at the Harvard Divinity School, and I've been talking to him. He's trying to integrate grace back in, trying to take ideas of the Protestant understanding of grace and integrate it into Mormonism. So I'm hoping that this is something that could continue, and we can have this again. This is about having a conversation about a discussion. So I'm just making a recommendation to look at grace as something that's really important. It's radical, and it differentiates us from the rest of the world with the other religions. And I think you should contemplate what Jesus did for us at the cross, and that was a free gift. And then understand that concept, I think, is important. And I just want to invite people who are the thinkers within the philosophers and theologians of the LDS Church to really explore this concept and this idea and see how it can maybe help contribute to your theological underpinnings as well.
Have you read the talk by Brad Wilcox, His Grace is Sufficient? Have you heard about that?
You know what? I think I heard a little bit about it. Refresh me on that.
So Brad Wilcox is a talk that he's most famous for, given at BYU. It's titled "His Grace is Sufficient," and he basically starts introducing that Protestant concept of grace into Mormonism. But it's hard because he wants to say, we can't do anything to save ourselves because Jesus did everything.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing we can do, but we still have to go to the temple, pay tithing.
Oh, right.
do
Yeah.
all this stuff. So it's pretty confusing.
Yeah, it's very confusing. And again, that's you're adding a work there that I don't know is necessary. Again, it has to be if it's participatory. We're doing this together, where I'm doing these works out of my love and gratitude for what he did for me at the cross. It's not because I'm trying to earn my way or trying to be on his good side to earn favor. I do these works because I am grateful for what he did for me at the cross. Right. If it becomes I do these works because I have to, then you just become another works-based religion that all other religions are like, and it does. Then it defeats the whole purpose of what Jesus did at the cross. It's like, what's the point? If it's things that I could do to have to do, then why did he even have to do what he did at the cross? I mean, that's just to me.
And I think to fully embrace grace, the Mormon Church will have to make the tithing to be optional. They would have to make the word of wisdom to be optional. So then there's no, rigorous things that you would have to follow in order to gain salvations. And everything is optional, but you choose what to do to show your love for Christ or God.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, and again, we're having dialogue and conversation about what does Protestant Christianity, what can it bring to the table? What can the idea of grace bring to the table? And then how can you take the ideas of Mormonism that make it unique and integrate it within a way where it's more about exercising your free will, your free agency, and it's part of the process where you can still use the guide stones within the restoration to help you in this process that you're going through, but it's not about having to do it, it's about you wanting to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think if the LDS Church fully embraced grace, it couldn't have the degrees of kingdoms.
Degrees of glory.
Degrees of glory, yes, thank you. Mm-hmm. In the celestial kingdom. Mm-hmm. I think they would have to reformat that whole concept because you have to do certain things to be in these degrees of the celestial kingdom, the highest kingdom. Mm-hmm. So grace, if it's sufficient to be with God, then there would be no degrees.
Yeah, and see that's the church's problem. That's the issues that the theology of the Mormonism brings to the table. That you have to figure. That's not my problem.
It's not.
I'm given hey, this is where grace can be beneficial. But now you got to take all this into account about your theology of the afterlife and what happens with exaltation and all that kind of stuff as well. Because I don't believe in those things. But yeah, you're just gonna have to be creative, Jackson Washburn, and see what you can do.
I think it's so funny that in your worldview, Jackson Washburn is going to be the one who's determining Mormon theology of the future. That's almost bizarro world Mormonism.
I think there's a lot of people that find Jackson to be an interesting person, and I think he brings ideas to the table. I love
Jackson.
Yeah. So I just think people like Jackson Washburn need to be given a lot of freedom to kind of play with these concepts and these ideas and see where it goes, because you just never know what's going to come out of that.
Jackson Washburn, it's up to you to save Mormonism. You can do it. I love it. Yeah, and I believe, Jen, to your point, this exclusivity Mormonism doesn't play well in 2022. And so the degrees of, it'd be hard to walk back the 3 degrees of glory, but I don't think that's doing the Mormon Church any favors. And I do agree, there's just so many people that are just life is hard enough. So many people, adults and teens, are just I'm not sure I want to live anymore. So all this pressure, all the Mormon rules and all the perfectionism, it's along with CES letter stuff and LGBT stuff, this perfectionism stuff has taken a lot of people out of the church. It's just people are getting exhausted and feeling terrible about themselves. And they're like, why do I want to be a part of a church that's always making me feel super guilty and shamed?
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of a similar thing you have with Catholicism, where they have a lot of shame, a lot of scrupulosity. They were the ones that came up with that term. And you find quite a bit of scrupulosity here within Mormonism as well. And so, I do think that, when you put it all on the individual, that for some people that can make life for them a living hell. So my heart goes out to people who are in works-based religions, whether it's Catholicism or whether it is some branches of the restoration. I really feel like you're putting a lot on people. I love you guys. I love the church. I love the members of the church. And I'm just saying this in love. I'm just trying to say, like, I think that if you can make it more about what he did at the cross and less about what I'm doing, then you can put a lot of take away a lot of performance pressure on people. And it just they can rest in the peace of Christ, and be just to know that they're one of his children, and then that can also take away a lot of the anxiety and the stress and the pressure that one would have in their life. And religion and stuff should provide solace. It shouldn't be there to put high demands on us, because then it just becomes one more thing in this world that we have, another burden that we have to carry, and life is hard enough as it is.
Yeah, I love it. All right. Well, I can't argue with that recommendation. You have a final one about the hymn name change.
Yep.
Is this your last one?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
What's the recommendation?
I'll tell you what, I'll go to other Christians and I'd talk to them about Mormonism, and I say, there's one thing I want to tell you about the church, is that they have this hymn called Praise to the Man. And I'll tell you, that's like fingernails on a chalkboard for a lot of these people. Most Christians just find that so like idolatrous. And what I find so interesting is that one of the very first things that Joseph Smith III did when he became the prophet of the RLDS church is he made a point to change the name of the song to Praise to the Lord. And this is Joseph's own son that did this, because he recognized the issues of singing this song. Because again, it's actually I played the song once for my mom, and she said, it's actually got a catchy tune, it's pretty good. So it's a nice sounding song, but the idea of singing praise to a man is such a foreign concept within Christianity, and it does kind of feel idolatrous. And I know that the people who are singing the song aren't openly practicing idolatry, but I just think that as an outsider, most Christians hear just the name of that song and they're just like, no, that's where I draw the line. So I'm just giving, just how as an outsider, how we see things. I bring that up to Christian, Catholics, Protestants, whoever, and they just like, whoa, no, that defeats the whole point. Just the idea of having a song in which you're praising a man just takes away. It's not a very Christian sounding song. And so, but if you had praise to the Lord, well, then I'll sing that song with you.
How about follow the prophet? Follow the prophet, follow the prophet, follow. No?
It's a nice, It's got a catchy tune, yeah.
All right. Well, that's your list. Any final things, to church headquarters, any final things you want to say to them? You look them in the camera.
Yeah,
and
first of all, I don't want to, look, this was just kind of us having like a little fun thought experiment and things and observations that I've made. I'm not so presumptuous to say that I have all the answers or anything like that. We're having a little fun here. But as an outsider, I'm just saying, like, well, if I were to try to make Mormonism be able to kind of be a little bit more compatible with, conventional Christianity, and also open up avenues of dialogue, but things that also might be helpful to the members. The idea, to me, grace and the cross are important things. So if we could bring more of that into it, it also will be very beneficial to the members. So I do this in love. I'm speaking from my heart. I hope you don't take this the wrong way, but I'm just talking as an outsider, like things I think what our tradition, what our worldview brings to the table could perhaps inform you guys and help you guys in this conversation, this dialogue that we're having. And maybe you take 2 or 3 of these points and maybe run with it, or you ignore them all, and that's fine. I just want to say I love you all, and I hope you don't take anything out of this that I'm being facetious or criticizing the church. I genuinely just want to maybe just a few observations that I've made throughout the years about the church, and I think this was kind of fun. I think everybody would know that this I have a good spirit about this, right?
We all know you're right, Steven.
Yes.
You got the Jen thumbs up, got the Gerardo thumbs up, got the John thumbs up.
Okay.
That's a unanimity. We have unanimity.
Yeah, that should really work at the church office building. I got 3 thumbs up.
That's all they need. All right. Well, thank you, Steven. That concludes part 4 of our 2-hour epic, 2-day epic series of interviews with Steven Pynakker. And there's still more. So what we have left, come right back for part 5, where Steven tells us how the Mormon Church saved his life. And he discloses some very personal and intimate things about his own life, but he also talks about how he lost his faith in God and Jesus, became self-identified atheist, agnostic, and how it was only like a couple years ago, right before COVID started, that Steven regained his faith in Jesus and in God. And MormonStories played a role in bringing you to Jesus.
That's right.
Is that
folks.
right?
That's right. Stay tuned. It's pretty wild. The Lord works in mysterious ways.
Yeah. So come right back and we'll hear part 5 with Steven Pynakker, kind of his closing story. Thanks, Steven.
It was awesome.
Thanks, Gerardo. Thanks, Jen.
No problem.
All right. We'll see you guys for part 5 in just 1 second.